Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH, and today we're looking at Feather the Redeemed. So Feather is a fairly unique Boros commander. It's a 3-mana 3/4 flying, and it says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets a creature you control, so that's targets a creature you control, any creature, doesn't have to be Feather, exile that card instead of putting it into your graveyard as it resolves. If you do, return it to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So obviously we want to combine Feather with various cheap cards that target creatures so that we can get them back over and over and over again. So we have various cards that will slot into various categories. So one of them is, of course, the cheap Cantrips. So we have cards like Bandage, Crimson Wisps, Defiant Strike, Expedite, Fists of Flame, Niveus Wisps, and Shelter. For the most part, it doesn't really matter what these cards do, like giving our creature haste or +1/+0 doesn't matter. The main thing here is that they are 1-mana spells that draw a card. So they essentially say that with Feather out, they get to draw a card, and then on the end step, we get them back. So we get to keep just casting them over and over and over. And do note that this is at the beginning of the next end step. It's not just your end step. So if you do have additional mana lying around during opponent's turns, you can keep casting these instant speed cantrips on your creatures to continuously draw cards. We of course also have a DRC here just because it's so good with all of these various cheap spells that we're going to be casting over and over in order to allow us to filter into exactly what we want. Then apart from those cantrippers, we also have protection because we do need to make sure that Feather doesn't get killed since our entire strategy revolves around Feather. So we have cards that grant various combinations of either hexproof or protection from a color. So cards like Blacksmith Skill, Blessed Breath, God's Willing, Stave Off, Shelter, etc. Now, some ones to highlight specifically. We are also playing the cards like Mother of Runes, Giver of Runes, and Skrelv because we may not always have mana open the turn we play Feather. We have Swiftfoot Boots because we don't want to have to always continuously hold up mana, so this can just attach to Feather, giving it hexproof, and then we always have it protected for the rest of the game. We also have cards like Silence and Grand Abolisher to make sure that our opponent can't mess with us on the turn that we get Feather out or when we're starting to chain cards together. We do have a Sphere of Safety just to make sure that our opponents can't kill us because we're not that good at playing defense and we don't kill our opponents that quickly either. Some other cards to note that are pretty unique are things like Courageous Resolve. This is up to one target creature you control gains protection from each of your opponents until end of turn, draw a card. And then if you have 5 or less life, you can't lose life this turn, and you can't lose the game this turn, and your opponents can't win the game this turn. So if you ever do get to the point where you're at 5 or less life, you can continuously cast Courageous Resolve, meaning that your opponents can never win as long as you have the mana up to keep casting this. So even if they have a Thoracle win or something like that, you can just use Courageous Resolve to make sure that you don't lose, and then you get it back because it is a targeted spell. Similarly, we've also got Galadriel's Dismissal. Target creature phases out, and if you kicked it for an additional 3 mana, each creature target player controls phases out. This is mainly so that Feather can survive sweepers, which it couldn't otherwise survive with any of its other protection spells. And then some other pieces of protection like Ricochet Traps, Urge of Salvation, Cavern of Souls to get through counters. Do have some ramp, of course, to make sure we can get stuff out. Mox Amber also particularly relevant because it means that the turn we play Feather, we at least have 1 extra mana open to protect it or do something else. We've got some cards as removal, but this also includes cards that work with Feather, so things like Reckless Rage. Deal 4 damage to target creature you don't control and 2 damage to target creature you do control. So this can be a 4 damage, 1 mana instant that you can cast repeatedly. Same thing with Fall of the Hammer. 2 mana, target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to another target creature. And Explosive Entry is a sorcery for 2 mana that says destroy up to 1 artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature. You got a little bit of stacks with Blood Moon, Magus of the Moon, Drowneth Magistrate, and Grip. Unwinding Clock, which combines with all of our various mana rocks to untap them during opponent's turns, so we have mana to cast our instant speed spells on our opponent's turns over and over and over, particularly good with the cantripping spells. And then some other cards that are sort of equivalent to Feather or they do something similar. These are just other creatures that are good with our spells. So Bill Potts is 4 mana 2/4 whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets only Bill Potts, or activate an ability that targets only Bill Potts, copy that spell or ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. This ability triggers only once each turn. And Zada Hedron Grinder, which is whenever you cast an instant or sorcery that targets only Zada, copy the spell for each other creature you control that spell could target, and each copy targets a different one of those creatures. So these are just ways of increasing the amount of cards that you're drawing with the various cantrip targeted spells. And again, since Feather doesn't care which creature you target, you can just target Bill or Zada to get the additional effects out of them. Some fast mana, including cards that work better with Feather. So we've got things like Burgi and Urabrask. These are particularly good with the red spells, so that we can keep casting the red spells multiple times without having to use up too much mana if we have multiple of them. Same thing with Runaway Steamkin. This can essentially bank our red spells into more red mana later. Stormkiln Artist makes a treasure whenever we cast an instant or sorcery. And then Sudden Breakthrough is target creature gets +2/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn and create a treasure token. So for 2 mana, we can create a treasure token, and then we get it back using Feather's ability. So this allows us to build up more treasure tokens. And then we do have the Dual Caster Mage Twin Flame combo in order to just combo out later in the game. Then in addition to all that, we've got various beatdown cards. So since we're going to be casting instants or sorceries over and over and over, since we keep getting them back with Feather, we can also win the game instead of with a just straight up combo by just flooding the board with tokens or continuously dealing damage. So Gutter Snipe and Fire Inscription will trigger whenever we cast an instant or sorcery to deal 2 damage to each of our opponents. Aria Flame does similar, Aria Flame has a similar effect. And then we have Young Pyromancer and Monastery Mentor to create tokens whenever we cast one of those spells. A Crone Crusader will make a 1/1 whenever we target a Crone Crusader. And then lastly, Phalanx Leader is whenever we target it, we put a +1 counter on every one of our creatures. So again, the main thing that we want to do is use Feather to loop targeted spells, primarily cantrips, and then eventually win the game either by just dealing tons of damage with these cards, filling up a board with these cards, or just finding the Dual Caster Twin Flame combo. And that is Feather the Redeemed.